Hello and welcome back to Steaming with Steve. Today we're going to keep going on with our adding and subtracting of directed numbers. Now this is very similar to the multiplying and dividing, except it's slightly different. Now we do use the same rule again, so if it's positive and positive, it becomes a positive. If it's a negative and negative, it becomes a positive. And if they're different, it becomes a negative. Now you still do use this, but it's slightly different. Now it's really important that you understand how it's slightly different, which is what we're about to go through. So let's jump on in. So when we add and subtract directed numbers, we still use the same rule. So if it's the same, it's good. And then if it's different, it's bad. If you use that little mantra when you go before you do each one of these, it will make you that much faster. So the same rule is pretty simple. If it's a positive and positive, it became a positive. If it's a negative and negative, it became a positive. If it's a positive and negative, it becomes a negative. And then if it's a negative and positive, it becomes a negative. Now, if you see two symbols that are directly next to each other, that's how this works when we add and subtract. So it's not if it's attached to the front of the numbers, it's if they're next to each other when we do these operations. So if you see a positive and positive, that becomes a positive. A negative and negative becomes a positive, because that's the same as if I said I didn't not walk down the street. So by saying that, see, that's a double negation, which then becomes what it originally was, which was I walked down the street. Then you have a positive and negative, which equals a negative and positive, which equals a negative. Now, this example works really well when we talk about money. So I want you to imagine that I'm a banker with an infinite amount of money, and I can either give you money or take money away. Now, this scenario works really well because it starts getting you to think, well, are you happy or sad with the outcome of how we interact based on the positives and negatives that we give? And then I also want you to think that there's always going to be a bigger amount of money and then a small amount of money that I'm going to exchange. Now, this works really well. The only difference is if you had two of the same amounts, we would know that always equals 0. So if you had 6 minus 6, for example, that would equal 0. But let's have a look at some of these examples. So the first option with the 4, if you had a big amount of money and I gave you a small amount of money, would you be happy or sad? And hopefully you would be happy, right? Because you made a whole heap of money out of me. The next scenario is if I give you a big amount of money and then only take away a small amount of money off that, while you didn't make as much money, you would still be happy because you got the money for free. Next option, if I take a big amount of money from you, but only give you a small amount of money back, overall, you would not be happy with that scenario. And the last one, if I take a big amount of money from you and then take a small amount of money from you, again, you would not be happy. Now, you're probably wondering, how does this connect to adding and subtracting negative numbers? Well, let's change, instead of the pictures we have there, let's put some values in. So if I gave you $9 and then gave you $2, overall, you would still be happy with me because I gave you $11 all up. The next one, if I gave you $9 but then only took $2 away, you'd still be happy, but because you made $7 for nothing. The next one, if I took $9 away from you, but then gave you back $2, overall you'd not be happy because I took $7 away from you. And then if I took $9 away and then took $2 away, you would not be happy because I took $11 away from you. Hopefully that's making a little bit more sense. Now we can also swap the order around. So instead of having the big amount of money always first, we can then have the small amount of money at the start. So let's have a look at these 4 options again with the different order. Now, if you pick up the pattern, or the order doesn't necessarily matter. So if I gave you a small amount of money and gave you a big amount of money, would you be happy or sad? Well, hopefully you'd be happy. If I took a small amount of money, but then gave you a big amount of money back, overall, you would be happy. If I gave you a small amount of money, but then I took a big amount of money back, you would not be happy. And last one, if I took a small amount of money and then took a big amount of money, you would not be happy. These are all the combinations that you can think of when you add and subtract positive and negative numbers. So let's change it with numbers now. So if I gave you $3, but then gave you $8, you'd be happy because I gave you 11. If I took $3, but then gave you back 8, you'd be happy because I gave you $5. If I gave you $3, but then I took $8 away, you'd be really unhappy because I took $5 away from you. And the last one, if I took $3 and then I took $8 away, you would not be happy because I took $11. So what you should notice here is there's these values with the 11 and 5, and then 5 and 11. So if I take two numbers away, it's the same as adding them together and then just jamming a negative on the front. If I take a bigger amount from a smaller amount, it's the same as just doing the normal subtraction, but then I just flip the symbol and put a negative on the front. That's basically what your mind has to do when you do these. So when you do addition, first step is always work out the central symbol, then identify the biggest amount, and then work out if you're happy or not. So in this case here, I've got a positive and negative. So overall that would become a negative. And this is what I was talking about, the symbols when they're next to each other. So that then becomes a negative. So then now we have me taking away $3 and then taking away 8, which means I've taken away $11. So to explore this, let's unpackage some of these. So first step, symbol in the middle, positive and negative becomes a negative. That's the same as me giving $2, but then taking away 6, which would give you negative $4. The next one, there is no symbol in the middle, so I don't really have to change anything. And we just need to read it. So that's the same as me taking away 3, but then giving back 9, which then gives you 6 overall. The next one down here, positive and negative becomes a negative. So that's the same as me taking away 7, then taking away 5 to give you negative 12. Then this one here, positive and negative becomes a negative. So that's the same as me taking away 8, taking away 2 to give you negative 10. Next one here, we've got a positive and negative, so that becomes a negative. So it's the same as me giving you 4, but then taking away 3. And we've been doing that since grade 2, so that should just equal 1. And the last one here, it's the same as me taking away 5, but then giving you back 5. So that actually balances out to give you 0. Nothing has happened. So just pause the video, have a go at these ones. I'm going to move off the screen just quickly for a sec. Cool. So here we go. Let's have a crack at these. So the first one, positive and negative becomes a negative. So that's the same as 5 take away 3, which gives you 2. Negative and negative becomes a positive, so that's 5 plus 3, which equals 8. Positive and negative becomes a negative, so that's negative 2. Negative and negative makes a positive, so that's the same as 2 plus 4, which equals 6. Negative 5 plus 3 gives you negative 2. Negative 5 minus 3 gives you negative 8. Negative 3 plus 6, which gives you 3. Negative 3 minus 6 gives you negative 9. Positive and negative becomes a negative, so that's the same as negative 3. Negative and negative becomes a positive, so 2 plus 5 equals 7. Positive and negative becomes a negative, so that's 7 minus 1, which equals 6. Negative and negative becomes a positive, so that's the same as 8. Positive and negative becomes a negative, so that's 1 minus 5, 6, which equals negative 5. Negative and negative becomes a positive, so it becomes 7. Positive and negative becomes a negative, so it's minus 4 minus 5, which equals negative 9. Negative and negative becomes a positive, so minus 4 plus 5, which equals 1. Positive and negative becomes a negative, so it's the same as minus 10. Negative and negative becomes a positive, so minus 3 plus 7 becomes 4. Positive and negative becomes a negative, so it's the same as 4 minus 6, which equals negative 2. Negative and negative becomes a positive, so it's the same as 4 plus 6, which equals 10. A positive and a negative becomes a negative, so it's the same as 3 minus 4, which equals negative 1. Negative 4 minus 5 becomes negative 9. Negative 6 plus 5 becomes negative 1. Negative and negative becomes a positive in the middle there, so 2 plus 6, which equals 8. Positive and negative equals a negative, so 3 minus 5, which equals negative 2. Negative and negative becomes a positive, so 5 plus 3, which equals 8. Positive and negative equals a negative, so 8 minus 7 equals 1. Negative and negative becomes a positive, so it's minus 3 plus 4, which equals 1. Positive and negative equals a negative, so 7 minus 10 equals negative 3. And last one is negative 4, 1 plus negative 7 equals negative 8. Cool. So subtraction. First step, work out the symbol in the middle. Exactly the same process when we add and subtract. We identify the biggest amount and then work out if you're happy or not. So in this case here, this is why subtraction is a little bit different. So we have a negative and negative in the middle here. So negative and negative, they're different. So the symbol then becomes overall positive. Notice that we're not worried about the symbol at the front. It's just the symbols in the middle here. And then we work out the numbers. So this is the same as negative 1 plus 6, which then gives you 4. Cool. So a little exploration. We've got a negative and negative, so it becomes a positive. So now we have minus 5 plus 2, which gives you negative 3. Next one, we've got negative 6 minus 4. So that's the same as me taking away 6, then taking away 4. So I've taken away $10 away from you. The next one, negative and negative becomes a positive. So 7 plus 8 equals 15. Negative 3 minus 9. So taking away 3, taking away 9 gives you negative 12. Negative and negative in the middle becomes a positive. So this is the same as minus 4 plus 12, which becomes 8. and then a negative negative in the middle becomes positive. So this is the same as negative 5 plus 4, which gives you negative 1. Cool. So just pause the video, have a go at this. There's some really interesting thing with putting the numbers in. Cool. So the first thing we should notice is we've got a plus, and the overall it becomes a negative in total. So if we did minus 5 plus 3, that becomes the negative 2. The next one, then we've got negative 4 minus minus 5, so that becomes a 1 overall. Then we have minus 5 minus 1, which then gives us negative 6. For question 4, if we did negative 8 minus minus 2, becomes 6. And then question 5, we've got minus 1 minus 2, which gives us negative 3. Question 6, negative 8 minus minus 4 becomes negative 4. And notice that I'm looking for the numbers that sort of symmetrically balance out to give you 4. The 4 different ways to make this one work here. So we can put minus 4 plus 3. We can then do minus 8 plus 7. We could also do minus 2 minus 1. And then minus 5 minus 4. And then the last one, choose 3 numbers that add together to give negative 10. So overall, it's going to have to be a bigger number that's the negative. So I went through and did negative 1 minus the 2, and then minus the 7 at the end. And then that balances out. So hopefully you remember the same rule, that if it's the same, it's good. If it's different, it's bad. And we must do that in only the central symbols when we add and subtract. So multiplying and dividing, totally different here. But yeah. So there's a Dr. Frost there that I'd love for you to have a crack at. That does help and give me insight to where you're actually at with these. The more you practice these, the easier they become. And it definitely will make your algebra super strong. So that's it from me. If you did enjoy the video, give us a like and subscribe, as it does help with that YouTube algorithm. And yeah, see you next time on Steam It with Steve. Adios.